Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the celebration of our dear Steve's life, which all of us have had the great gift of sharing. And maybe those people who came from Poland, can you raise your hands? Let's give them a hand. Hard to find a more sincere expression of love than that trip for a short but important ceremony. The way we will unfold, there'll be 8 people speaking, so you can count down. And hopefully you refilled your drink, and if you want to bob outside for any reason, feel free to. Just bathrooms, if you enter the house, you look to the left, there's a sign that says Buddha bathroom. Just go there. And to your right, if you look to your right, it's quotes bathroom. And so hopefully you can find those places. But if you just go in and look left or right, you should see the signs. And then when we finish the ceremony, we'll go back up and mingle a bit while they convert the tent to the dinner tables. And everybody's invited for dinner. It's also optional, so we understand if any of you have any other commitments. And during dinner, we'll also have a mic for people who would like to share some thoughts or memories. And so everybody who would like to speak will get that opportunity. That'll come after the ceremony when we come back into the tent. And on behalf of the Buckley family, we just want to say thank you for not only for coming, but for things that you did for Steve and the family over the years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dee Buckley. Please welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Oh, are these on? Yeah, they are. So happy to see so many wonderful, familiar faces from all over. I mean, you mentioned the Poles, but there are Scots and Brits here, and people from all over. So, Steve was the 4th of us 6 Buckley kids. He was a big brother when he was barely a year old. Over time, we divided into 2 groups. We had the 3 big kids and the 3 little boys, of whom Steve was the oldest. His formative years were spent on Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, and probably most of you know that those islands hold a very special place and a lot of memories for our family. Steve was only 11 when they moved there, and he graduated from high school there, so they really were formative years. During those years, Steve developed 2 attachments that were steadfast throughout his life: a love for the Denver Broncos. Jacek, he turned Jacek from Poland into a huge Bronco fan, and a love of his friends and memories from Kwajalein. And Nikki's here to represent the Kwajalein people. And Nikki and Steve go back to, high school. Anyway, during that time, during the summers, my brothers would come back to Colorado. The whole family came back to Colorado, and my brothers would base themselves with my family in Colorado Springs, and then they would travel. A couple times they traveled all around the U.S. on airline passes visiting friends. One summer, Steve and Mike both toured Europe with our parents, and from what they excitedly shared with me, their takeaways from that trip were the amazing flea markets in Italy, and that French and Italian women didn't shave their legs, which was shocking to them. Little did Steve know then that his future would find him spending half his life in Europe. It's fair to say that Steve developed his passion for travel from our family and from those traveling summers. That love of travel never faded. As a matter of fact, during the last 6 months of his life, Steve had Alex and Dick and I scrambling to figure out how to get him to Kwajalein. And this is when he was in a wheelchair and whatever, but his vision was, I can figure it out. We can get there. I want to go back to Kwaj and see it. And if Kwaj is even further away from Denver than is Warsaw. Anyway, Steve left the South Pacific, and as he noted, the alliance of the three little boys, to attend Stanford and later Harvard Business School. He then began a career doing business consulting. He was doing very well, enjoying his work and making good money. He told me one time he'd just gotten a raise, and it was enough that he would never have to cook again. And that was his early goal. I don't want to have to cook dinner. And that was a bit of freedom that he treasured and he mentioned frequently over the years. I heard him talk about that. That was lucky because the only thing he could cook was chicken or cheese quesadillas. And Alex, you had, I know, more than one dinner of cheese quesadillas when Steve was in charge. A few years after beginning his career, he had the opportunity to participate in a task force established to advise Polish businesses on how to convert from a communist to a capitalist economy. He told me the timing of this opportunity was ideal because he had decided he didn't want to spend his life working long hours, taking red-eye flights, just to make rich people richer, which is what he had been doing. He saw this as an opportunity to see changes in the world that would affect millions of people. After that task force experience, Steve and Jin Berg established Company Assistance Limited, and there are Company Assistance Limited people here with us today. So this is 30, 35 years ago. And then very shortly after that, they were joined by Rob. Rob helped, he and Steve started 2 more companies. It was risky, I know, but it was exciting and new. They could participate in, perhaps influence the change, the direction of enormous changes that happened in Eastern Europe during the 1990s. I don't think they ever looked back once they got started. It was a great move. One thing about this, well, a couple things. Even though the company succeeded, things went well, it was tougher than maybe everybody would realize. One time when I was in New York on business and Steve was there, I said, "Oh, I'll treat for dinner." And he said, "Oh, good, because I'm using my credit card for salaries." And I said, well, I felt bad for him, but then I thought, wow, he must have a really good credit limit on his credit card to pay a salary. Because this was 30 years ago, you know. Anyway, one last observation. When he was thinking about this, he talked to our dad. And my recollection is that after that conversation, Dad wrote Steve a letter saying that he thought about it a lot and he didn't think this was a good idea. He said, circumstances are chaotic, true. The future uncertain, true. Steve didn't speak the language. True, he probably really never spoke the language. Dad just thought it would be really tough. When Steve and Dorota got married, Dad stood up at the wedding and he said, "I've never been happier to be wrong." He said, you know, he was so proud of what Steve had accomplished and the business he and his friends had created. He was impressed that Steve had the courage to take such a big risk. I don't think the rest of us, I mean, it was our brother. That's great, he's in Poland. We didn't really realize what was going on and what they were accomplishing. Throughout this time, though, Steve made regular visits back to Colorado. Despite how far away he was always with us at Christmas. We played our regular super competitive rummy games and Scrabble games, and he wouldn't stop until he won at least one, and preferably more than any other person there. Often after everybody else went to bed, Steve and I spent late nights, usually in our hot tub or at his kitchen table, talking about life and everything under the sun, and we would talk, and then we would cry, and then we would drink, and then whatever. But family was so valuable to him then, and he did his best to stay close to us no matter what. He loved to travel. He loved to dance. He was much better at the travel than at the dancing. But he shared both of those pleasures with his kids, and I don't think he was ever happier than when he and Dorota were showing the world to Natalia and Alex. Thanks to their efforts, while Poland is home, Colorado is a pretty close second. It was a blessing that when he became ill, Steve was willing to pick up and move back to Colorado. Big move after all that time and when he was sick. He was still feeling pretty good. We wanted to be sure he understood he was moving into assisted living. He did understand, and he said it seemed like what we all thought was best, and he trusted us. For those of you who wonder about his final year in particular, but the last few years, his kids were his champions. They both stepped up to help their dad however he needed and however they could. They did that with patience, with kindness, and enormous understanding for what he was going through. Dorota supported the kids and Steve through all of this, and it wasn't easy. And you didn't have to, and we love you for it. During those last months, Steve had family and friends around in abundance. Alex left California and moved to Denver to be a few blocks away from Steve. Steve had that, and he had caregivers. And I'd like you guys to stand up. These people were wonderful. Art and Yodette and Patience. There were so many kindnesses from them and so much love from them, and we are so amazingly grateful. It's wonderful. They helped Steve. They were patient and, as I said, kind, and they really wanted to help him lead his best life. He did that. He watched the last Bronco season, which was a great last season to watch. He did that with family, friends, lots of Bronco fans. Keith was there for almost all the games. Alex, where am I here? Alex came up with a whole lot of different outings that they went on, which gave Steve enormous pleasure. And while there were a lot of things he couldn't do the last few months, he was so happy with all the company. He always knew who we were and who his friends were that came to visit. It was a privilege that Natalia, Alex, Dick, and I were able to be with him at the end. He knew the kids were there, and he knew how much they all loved one another. That was there. It was tough to watch Steve navigate this illness, but he did so the best he could and with all possible support. Obviously, we would have loved for this not to have happened, but he was at peace at the end. His kids were with him. We couldn't have asked for much more. We're just grateful we had him in our lives. I want to especially thank Kent, Denise, Jeff, Keith, Annette, Nikki. The people, they came so often, they were with him, and everything we had hoped would happen near the end of Steve's life did. So thank you all. Thank you for sharing these memories and for supporting our family.
Over these past few weeks, I stared at my blank screen, trying to come up with something to write. I was overwhelmed with how much I wanted to say and convey to you all about my dad. How do you describe someone as special as him? I loved his generosity, positivity, curiosity, his wit, and humor. He loved to dance and was always the life of the party. The list goes on, but today I want to focus on what made our relationship most special to me and what I will miss the most now that he's no longer with us. My dad was my comfort person. He was the one I would go to when I needed advice, whether it was about my career, relationships, or just general life. I knew he would listen, ask thought-provoking questions, offer an interesting perspective, or an out-of-the-box solution. He loved giving advice, as well as receiving it. And Alex and I often got emails from him of his favorite quotes and life lessons that he wanted to share with us. Our dad had a deep respect towards people who did something different with their lives or took the less obvious path. He often encouraged us to take the road less traveled, and in so many ways, that's exactly how he lived his own life. He led by example. It was in his nature to be open-minded about other ways of life, perspectives, opinions. He was always curious, open to talking, and even if he disagreed, he would often initiate conversations to try to understand the other point of view. He was the least judgmental person I knew, and that's a trait of his that I'm deeply inspired by and hope to embody myself. That trait frequently surfaced during one of my favorite pastimes, playing pranks on him. It started on April Fool's Day until I realized the pranks were far more effective on random days. It was a way to test limits with him. I once pranked him with an email from a fake professor at Wesleyan, informing my parents that I was failing multiple classes at university. He called me to ask what was wrong, whether I was doing okay, and that he was always here for me when I needed someone to talk to. Another time, I told him I drove to Mexico for a party, and I couldn't get back into the US because I forgot my passport. He asked me how the party was, and said he'll send a copy of the passport to the consulate. When I pranked him that I got arrested and spent a night in jail because I was too scared to ask him to bail me out, he wrote me a text, "Sweetie, you can always tell me. Please don't ever not tell me. I accept you unconditionally." And most recently, there was an online trend where you call your father and tell him that you've been offered a high-paying job as a micro-influencer doing dangerous underwater gas welding for an oil company. Now, the majority of dads were shocked, appalled, and strongly advised against it. Instead, my dad's first reaction was, "So you get to go scuba diving?" After I was done talking, he just said, "Well, that sounds like a pretty cool experience to me," quickly followed by, "Have you spoken to your mother?" So as I tested the limits with him, I found that the limit did not exist. As a father, he loved, accepted, and supported me unconditionally. He taught me to embrace risk with open arms and showed me that it could lead to great things. Daddy, thank you for being my comfort person, for all your advice, the big and the small, for teaching me to never judge, to stay curious, to ask questions. Thank you for teaching me the importance of family and of friendship so deep that it becomes your chosen family. It has made me who I am today, and I deeply wish I could come to you now and ask you all the big questions I have about life. I will miss that so much, more than I can say. My dad rarely complained, and when Alex or I did, he would tell us, "Well, that's life in the big city." This was true up until the very end of his life, even when he was sick. I often questioned whether he understood what was happening to him. I wondered how he could remain so positive, even when faced with something so challenging. When we moved him to Denver in June of last year, he was so excited to be on a plane again. We all know how much he loved to travel. He knew he was moving into an assisted living center, but he looked at it as another new adventure. The past 6 years were tough. On him, on our whole family, on his close friends. Watching his greatest asset, his mind, slip away from us was a deep and painful heartache. I slowly began to mourn the dad that I used to have. But in many ways, his illness also brought me and him even closer. And as I watched him fight it, with positivity, hope, and humor, I often thought that he's the strongest person I know. Daddy, I know you're listening to us and watching over us today. Just take a look at all the people who've gathered here today to celebrate your beautiful, unique, and full life. You've had an impact on so many. I wish more than anything that we had more time together. But as I stand here today, I feel incredibly grateful for having you as our dad. I love you.
I said this in Warsaw, but it bears repeating that those pranks would have gone very differently if they were done by me.
True.
Yeah, I would have had an adventure getting back into the US, I think. For the last 6 months, I've been living in Denver, just 4 minutes down the road from my dad. I feel incredibly lucky and grateful that I was able to spend that time with him. I saw him almost daily. Sometimes I was with him all day. Other days I'd just pop in to say hi, bring some snacks, or watch a Broncos game. For the last 6 months, he was my routine. When I began writing this, I knew the important facts that I wanted to include, that I loved him, that I'm grateful for the time I had with him, and that I'll miss him. Each of those was as important to say as it was obvious. I wanted something that conveyed it all. I looked through pictures, I listened to his music, I tried to find a single perfectly emblematic memory, but no single thing seemed like enough. At the same time, nearly every conversation I was having involved swapping stories about my dad. Whether it was with immediate family or just an acquaintance of his, these exchanges always seemed to circle around their own theme. It could be his personality as a kid, his ability to always forget at least one thing in a taxi, or the inevitability of him tearing up when making a toast, among many others. Over the weeks, I realized that with each conversation, I was taking part in an ancient and inherent tradition. I was crafting the story of a loved one. As we're going about our lives, even in its most mundane moments, we are shaping our story. Every person we speak to, every decision we make conveys some part of us to the world. When we die, our active role in that story comes to an end. And at that moment, everyone else that played a part in it takes stewardship of it. When a story comes into our care, it's in our nature to distill. We exchange stories, we find common ground in them, we narrow in on what, among all of us, stuck most. We try to crystallize what at its core that story was about. Given time, that process wears away at mountains of time and experience, often down to a symbol. One such symbol came into my possession. No. This hat. Why this hat, you may ask? What key characteristic of my dad did this hat symbolize? Let's see if you can find a common thread here. In short, this was his adventure hat. On a lengthy trip or in a faraway place, he often had it with him. In case you're wondering, no, I don't think its visual and thematic resemblance to Indiana Jones's hat is a coincidence. When I was a kid, he told me that a stranger in the 80s mistook him for Harrison Ford, and I think that stuck with him rather closely. As many of you know, that spirit of adventure pervaded many aspects of his life. I don't know where it came from, but I do think that growing up on an isolated Pacific island whose sole purpose was having ballistic missiles fired at it was a good start. I do know that he was always drawn to the unusual and the unfamiliar. I know that to him, in a vacuum, the more interesting choice was the right choice. And I know that when he made that choice, he would also make it happen. It was that determination that brought him from Kwajalein to California, and it was that spirit that brought him here to Warsaw. I didn't edit that part. It also brought about some of my most cherished memories with him, including one that shaped my own future plans. When I was about 16, I had 5 days off of school, which we planned to spend hanging around Warsaw. Before the break, he walked into my room and said, "Let's go somewhere." I asked him where, and he said it was up to me. A day of packing later, we were lugging our carry-ons to the Tel Aviv airport at 3 a.m, and at that moment, I told him that I don't know what I want to do in the future, but I do want it to land me in faraway places at very odd hours. He agreed. I have to mention that on that trip, we also went to Jordan to visit Petra. I think our visit there occurred in equal parts due to his interest in history and Petra's prominent role in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Even his disease couldn't touch that part of him. We celebrated his 70th birthday in the Rocky Mountains at the Theory Cabin. And as soon as we got to the cabin, he asked if we could go skiing. Now, at this point, skiing was far, far beyond his physical ability. But this being the least snowy winter in Colorado's history, we had a good excuse. So we simply said the slopes are closed because there's no snow, which was true. He thought for a moment and he said, well, I'd still give it a shot. I actually don't doubt that under different circumstances he might have. There is more of him that I'm going to carry with me than I could hope to include here. And I'm sure far more than I even realize now. But this aspect of him, this urge to explore, is why I'm here. In one way or another, it's why many of us are here today. I will always feel incredibly fortunate that I can admire and thank him for being the way he was.
For our dad's 60th birthday, we put together a video using old home movies and his favorite songs. A few months ago, we found it again, played it for him, and it quickly became a new favorite. In his final months, he would ask us nearly every day to play the hands up video, as he called it. Using clips of our most cherished moments with him, we've put together a similar video for today.
You ready? Hands up, baby, hands up. Give me your heart, give me your heart. Metallica, you want to dance? Okay, here, I'll show you how to dance. Since I'm a good dad.
comes the sun, here comes the sun, I say it's alright. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, I say,
aspects of this. Something I don't think anyone mentioned in Warsaw was Steve was a beautiful-looking man as well, wasn't he? Which Natalia and Alex have inherited. Can we give Natalia and Alex a round of applause for just amazing? I can't believe, really, it's actually 35 years since I touched down in Warsaw on August the 6th, 1990, and met Steve on my first evening there. And everything just went from there. I know many of you have known him 50 to 70 years, but as his business partner and friend, and Steve's business partner means I probably made up a lot on intensity where I missed out on years, I can assure you. But Jackie and I had nearly 20 beautiful years with Steve and Dorota, Natalia and Alex, and our two boys, Christopher and Max. And they're here in spirit, of course, as is Justina and Oscar, my little boy. And there were 140 people in an amazing gathering in Warsaw, and they're here in spirit as well, and many of them asked me to represent them here. And we also got probably 200 written tributes to Steve. And what I wanted to do was give you some of my feelings, but also try and give voice to what those people had to say. And there were sort of three words that appeared. I think some of you have read these. Keith was mentioning it. There were three words that just were consistently mentioned in those tributes. The first was pioneering. And, I mean, it's hard to understand Poland back in 1990 when you look at it today. But, you know, how do you do business in a place where you have 80% inflation per month? You know, and how do you help a company that's got no management, no sales force, and has overnight lost 80% of sales? I remember one company that Steve oversaw was in the shoe sector. And he concluded the answer lay in selling down finished goods inventory. And literally, the warehouse had hundreds of thousands of shoes as a result of mismanagement. But then we discovered they were all left shoes. So, you know, this is how pioneering it was in Warsaw. Emerging markets were new. Globalization was new. A transition from central planning was new. And in a situation where basically none of us knew what we were doing, Steve's strategy was, we're going to be the tallest midgets. And the strategy worked. In the first 2 years, we helped restructure, I think, 12 companies and privatize them. But probably, as Steve said, what we did more than anything else was to learn how we really could add the most value and contribute. And the second word that was mentioned in all of these tributes was contribution. As Dee mentioned, Steve did not go to Poland to make money. He went to Poland to make a difference. And I think he was earning about 10% of what he was earning at Bain in the US when he touched down in Poland. And what we decided, and it was really Steve and Jim Van Berg and sort of mini-me, we decided the way to contribute best is to help develop the private sector. Jim, together with participation from Steve and I, set up a mass privatization fund management company, which was one of 15 that privatized 500 companies in Poland. And deep thanks to Jim. He unfortunately has his own health issues and can't be here today. Steve and I established Poland Partners together with some American partners, which was really the first privately financed venture capital fund. If you wind forward, Innova since then has built or helped build 170 businesses. And I could only get data since 2010, but Innova companies employ 18,000 people and created 4,500 jobs. So Steve made a major contribution, there is no doubt about that. The third word that appeared, and it might surprise some of you, but was mentor. And Steve was not formally a mentor of anybody, let alone 200 or 300 people. But so many people said he was an amazing mentor. And it was because he had such powerful strengths and character traits that you simply picked them up by osmosis. And, you know, I was 10 years younger than Steve and worked with him for so long, so I have so many things that I'm deeply thankful for. But the things mentioned by other people are very similar to what I would say. And I think the first thing is just his extraordinary intellect. His ability to take a very complicated situation and distill it down to just a few things that mattered. His big mantra, and his finger would always come up, if you get the big things right, you can get a lot else wrong. And that really, really stuck with me. A second one was his just enormous curiosity and creativity, his ability to think outside the box. His mantra at Innova was mental agility. And, you know, it is one of, I think, Innova's big competitive advantages. A third thing was commitment to excellence. He always said Innova must be the best, not the biggest. And then the fourth was he truly cared. Steve could be very demanding as a partner and even as a friend sometimes, but he was a totally special friend who was always there with you. And then in business, the mantra was, we do the right thing. The last thing, which won't surprise you, is fun. And we'll talk about that later, but the fun we had is just beyond belief. But actually, I don't really want to talk about what Steve was. I'd rather talk about how he lives on. And these gifts that he gave us mean that he really does live on. And I think he lives on in Poland. Steve would never take credit. He always said, I was lucky to land in Poland. He'd never take credit to just the extraordinary success that is Poland. But one of the expressions, I think someone mentioned, language was not one of his fortes. But he loved an expression, gruba ryba. And a gruba ryba is a big fish. And Steve never thought he was a big fish. But interestingly, in the early 90s, you know, we were, and several of you in this room, we were meaningful-sized fish in a very little pond. And we were sort of advising the grube ryby about, you know, how Poland might evolve. And as I say, Steve would not take any credit for the success that is Poland. But if you look at what economists say, there are only 3 large economies in the last 50 years, emerging markets, that have transitioned what they call the middle income trap, which is how do you get from relying on low-cost labor to moving to innovation and higher value added. And the only 3 big countries that have done that are Japan, South Korea, and Poland. And Steve wouldn't take any credit for that, but I am a great believer in the butterfly effect, you know, especially at the early inception of big things. Little things that you do can have a big impact, and I think Steve had that impact. The second thing is in Innova, and Innova is the best. It's nearly the biggest. I think it will be the biggest soon. We have outstanding next generation management, but in the last 6 years, Poland has been the Private Equity Association Firm of the Year for 4 years out of 6. Maybe more important, Innova operates on 7 core values, which we jointly created 25 years ago, and you'll recognize 4 of them. Commitment to excellence, mental agility, do the right thing, and fun. And they are all Steve's inception or crystallization of what we all felt. But I think maybe most importantly, Steve lives on in all of us, and not just in our hearts, but in our own way. I would say he lives on in the big things that we try to do right. He lives on in the boxes we think outside of, and just in sheer effectiveness rather than efficiency. I think he lives on in the difference we try to make, in the right things we try to do, and in the example we try to set. And he lives on in the fun we have. So I just want to say a deep, deep thanks on behalf of all of those people for what Steve has given us. And we will carry the baton forward for sure. I wanted to end with one of my favorite poems, which was actually Jackie dedicated it to her dad at his passing. And I've just noticed it's actually now on the front cover of the, should I read it? It's a bit like government. It has the unintended consequence of, do not stand at my grave and weep, and it has the very opposite effect on you. But do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. Thank you, Steve.
So you guys, do you want that door closed? Are you okay temperature-wise? Okay, so let me know if you want it closed. Who's next?
Good afternoon. My name is Marek Schabel. I met Steve and Dorota at the same time, end of '97, where together with Dorota, we were tasked with building or developing a new project funded by Poland Partners called Kids Play. And a challenging, very interesting project, which actually brought us together. And from that moment on, as families, we grew closer. Together with Renata, my wife, we then spent many years doing different things, but from a business point of view, that evolved into something completely different. And something that we very privileged to be close to your family and to have been close to your family over those years. I actually grew closer to Steve when he fell ill. We started spending time together playing squash. I used to take him out on the court, and there were moments where it started becoming more difficult, but in typical style, he was saying, I should have got that ball, and I was saying, quite honestly, it was difficult for anybody to get that ball. I mean, don't bash yourself. We'd go to the cinema, we'd go to dinners, but a lot of it also was, we spent some time playing games, and the games were what could we do to actually stimulate the mind. A lot of it was around general knowledge, which he actually adored. And for me, it was always, my memory really is of someone who just wouldn't take no. It was, I have to do that, and nothing is going to stand in my way. I can do it. And I'd like to read a poem, Ode to Steve. Looking down and smiling broadly, Balvenie double wood in hand, you savor this fleeting moment, emotionally at home in Poland. Touching down in early 90s, landscape pulsed with change. You unleashed creative intellect to transform, build and rearrange the lives, aspirations and dreams. in partnerships of many with us today. But enterprise aside, as we cast afar, or close to home we can say, with eyes set on intrepid folk, to the very end by your side, friends, caring wife, but most of all, your children, a roller coaster ride that embodies your legacy of high achievement in every turn, yet always there for family, those in need, and love in return. We'll miss your caring soul, true interest and repartee. Rest proud, dear friend. You did well, legacy for all to see. You are now at peace. Love and thoughts, Marek.
Hello. My name is Jeff Stone, and like a few other people in this room, I'm proud to say that I was friends with Steve for 52 years. I think with the exception of Dee and Brian and Nikki, that group knew Steve longer than anyone. And I have very vivid memories of the first time that I ever met Steve. Well, actually, the first time I ever laid eyes on Steve. It was probably the second day of college. We were in our college dormitory, which was called Arroyo. We were sitting in the lounge. It was the first dorm meeting. I was sitting across the room from him. He was tall, skinny. He had long hair. He was wearing a headband. He had mirrored sunglasses on, and he had no shirt on. He looked like the model that he ultimately became. I nudged the person sitting next to me, whom I don't remember, and said, "Who is that guy?" And they said, well, that's Steve Buckley. He grew up on Kwajalein. I nodded wisely, as if I knew what the heck Kwajalein was. I thought to myself, that is the coolest guy I have ever seen in my life. And I made a huge mistake coming to Stanford. From that inauspicious beginning blossomed an amazing friendship. At Stanford, in Washington, in San Francisco, when we shared time together, in Cambridge, we took so many wonderful trips together to New York City. We went skiing together. We were in Mexico together. We've spent time in London, trips to London, trips when Steve visited me and Ellen and our family in Chicago. And so many loving memories. I remember Steve and Natalia coming to visit us in Chicago, and Natalia making her first visit to, I think it was called the American Girl store. I didn't know what that was then. I'm not sure I know what it is today, but I remember Natalia being very happy. I remember being in London with our family, and Steve sitting down with our 7 or 8 year old son. I think he actually woke him up. They were playing chess together, and Steve was extremely gracious when Sam beat him at chess. In fact, I remember Steve coming to our home in Chicago and holding Sam in his arms. Sam was probably, I don't know, 6 months old. And we took a picture, and Steve said, "This is going to be so great because I'm going to send this to the Harvard Business School magazine, and no one's going to believe me that I've got a kid this age." I remember visiting Steve and Dorota in Warsaw and drawing pictures with you as a little girl. And I remember certainly the first time you joined our lives on that first ski trip. It was just a joy. And Steve was so happy. And the times we spent together at Piatti and the photographs I got to take of Alex doing his best imitation of Harry Potter and Natalia doing her best imitation of fathering her father as a glam shot model. But what's more important than just reciting memories is thinking about what you can distill from a friendship of 52 years. Steve was a complex person. We all know that. He was smart, as Rob said. He was curious. He was alive. He was certainly very adventurous. He was never very punctual. He loved life. He had an infectious laugh. You can see it right there. He lit up every room he was ever in. He took so much joy and pride in the fact that Ellen loved to dance with him and did not like to dance with me at all. Sorry, babe. I just couldn't keep up. He was so intellectually curious and fearless about his love for learning and new adventures and new experiences. I'm going to steal a line from our friend Kent, who's going to speak next. And I cleared this with Kent to make sure I wasn't stealing something he wanted to say, but it is so true. Kent has a quote which so beautifully describes Steve, which is that you cannot discover new oceans unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. Steve had that courage when he first went to Moscow in 1990 or 1991, thinking that was the new frontier. And even for Steve, Moscow was just a little bit too dangerous. But he migrated to Warsaw, and he found his purpose in life. He found his love. He found his family. He built an amazing business. And it wouldn't be fair to Steve's legacy not to acknowledge that he had his demons. He had his challenges. Certainly the challenges that he faced in the last few years of his life, but even before that. And those of us who were there know he faced those challenges with courage and integrity and honesty. But notwithstanding all of the wonderful things about Steve as a leader and as a friend and someone who loved life, the thing I will remember most about Steve is his love for the people he loved most in his life. Dorota, that starts with you. I know this to be true. You were the deep and true and abiding love of his life. Natalia and Alex, he was so proud of you. Those photographs, that smile, that effervescence he showed when he was with you. Phenomenal. Dee, I only got to see your love in its truest form for Steve over the last 2 or 3 years as we helped him navigate those difficult times, as we worked with him to help him make good decisions and land in a good place. I've said to all three of you at different times over the last couple of years, what you did for your brother and your dad was extraordinary. Steve loved his friends. He loved you, Ellen. He loved you, Kent, Denise, Bill and Eva, Keith and Annette, Rob, Peter Worth. These were people that meant so much to him. Steve's death was not easy for any of us. It was a long process. The last 5 years were tough. It was a full 10 or 15% of the years I've known Steve and loved him. But we were talking about this last night. He faced his impending death, which he knew was coming, with equanimity and with poise, with acceptance, with the courage that denominated his life. He never whined. He never talked about it being unfair. He never talked about what he would miss. Dee, Kent, Natalia, Alex, what you did for your dad, what you did for our friend, was not easy. It was not painful. It was very painful sometimes to watch. I firmly believe this in my heart, that the disease affected his judgment. And what we saw in some of his hardest days was not his truest essence. And we will remember him and love him for who he was, for the totality of who he was and the totality of his life. Ellen gave me a book recently to read called The Correspondent, which was a terrific novel about friendship and life. And I want to quote from a section in that book that was very meaningful to me. It was one friend writing to another. She wrote, "You were right about what you said. We are all 18 in our hearts. Before all the disappointment, all the ways it turned out to be much more painful than we ever thought it would be. But then again, it has been magic. I love you. We are the lucky ones. Steve is the first of our close circle to pass. He was an irreplaceable part of our lives. He will always be. Our lives have been enriched by knowing him and loving him. Ellen and I will always miss him. We will always love him. He's right here.
You guys still okay over there? Okay, good. In case you're having trouble keeping track, I'm number 7. And it's an honor to talk about one of the most honest people I've ever met. And this day is just a glorious Colorado day. And Steve loved Colorado, so somewhere he's smiling. By way of introduction, Buck was literally the first person I met when I arrived at Stanford. His room was next to mine. He was tall, to me at least, and handsome and articulate with a steady gaze, unless he was wearing his sunglasses, which was often. Anyway, for this boy from a small town in Wisconsin, it was quite intimidating to talk to Steve. I was sure he came from one of those wealthy families in those prestigious Eastern Coast schools like Andover or Exeter, only to quickly find out he was from a small island and a normal family, and I had never heard of either. Buck became famous quickly in the dorm, not for his formidable academic or athletic promise, although those were noteworthy, but rather for playing the same songs over and over and over at high volume. You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Bachman Turner Overdrive, was one song he ruined forever for so many by playing it multiple times in a day, including consecutively. Perhaps once we turn on the lively music after this service, the music Buck would have chosen for today, it might be on that tape, and perhaps we'll play it 3 times in a row for you to drive you all crazy. I lived with Steve for much of the time at Stanford, along with Bill and Keith, who are also here. We then moved to New York together and joined the same consulting firm and lived together for 2 more years. We then moved to Boston for business school, where we lived together for another 2 years. 6 years of living in the same tiny apartments. We were both lousy cooks. For me, he was a great roommate. We shared all the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs of our early careers. We also shared the experience of discovering New York City, which was quite amazing, since neither of us had ever been to a city like that, much less lived in one. We worked together, we ate together, we caroused together, we discussed life together. Buck had so many distinctive attributes. If you wanted to have a great, rational debate on a tricky topic, Steve was your man. If you wanted to have an exuberant day of skiing, Buck was your man. If you wanted to play a spirited basketball game, Steve was your man, although I must add that his jump shot was terrible for him. If you were wrestling with a big problem or decision and wanted to have someone to listen with great intensity and subtle nuance, Buck was your man. If you wanted to dance with energy and reckless abandon, spinning women around and lifting them up, Steve was your man. If you wanted to be on time for an important event, Buck was most certainly not your man. If you wanted to have someone enthralled with the newest technology for music or whatever, Steve was your man. His eagerness to check out new innovations were not just tied to new technologies, but also breakthroughs like roller bags to go through airports. I first ridiculed him for looking wimpy as I carried my heavy suitcase with manly pride, but soon realized that roller bags were one of the great advances of the 20th century. If you wanted someone to ride a motorcycle too fast through the middle of campus without a helmet, who would yell safety first each time before popping a wheelie, Buck was your dangerous partner. If you wanted help in upgrading your wardrobe, Steve was my man, as he took one look at the polyester shirts my parents had bought me for my new job in New York City and taught me that it was important to wear cotton shirts with light starch as a part of succeeding in business. If you wanted a roommate willing to live in the tiny Radio City apartments on 49th Street next to Times Square, where one had to navigate around homeless and prostitutes to enter our apartment building, Steve was your man. If you wanted an incredibly talented 30-something young man to drop his high-paying job with Bain in California and move to Poland to help Poland advance their economy after the wall fell, Buck was your man. If you wanted someone who intensely preferred warm and sunny climates, Steve was your man, making his Poland sojourn hugely ironic. If you wanted a similarly talented young man to start one of the first consulting firms in an emerging economy, Steve was your man. If you wanted a similarly talented young man to start one of Central Europe's first PE firms from scratch, Buck was your man. If you wanted to have a scotch and wide-ranging conversation after work, Steve was not your man. If you wanted to have 3 scotches and a wide-ranging conversation after work, Buck was your man. And I was his partner. And back in that day, that dynamic conversation would be followed by a late-night visit to Warsaw's first McDonald's. And then, if you wanted to see a highly successful executive confront and conquer the drinking habit, Buck was the man. He defeated that monster and never looked back. If you were looking for someone to learn Polish over 35 years, Steve was not your man. If you wanted to find someone willing to pack up his young family and fly all the way from Poland to Colorado and California almost every Christmas, year after year, to invest in relationships and creating those relationships for his wife and kids. That is one tough search, by the way, to find someone like that. But Steve was your man, and this commitment has blossomed into the blessing of Denise and my love for Dorota and the kids. Finally, if you wanted someone to endure a life-shattering neurological death sentence and never whine, Buck was one of the very few that can pull that off. And I will share that early on in this saga, I asked him how he was feeling about his condition in his life in his Warsaw apartment. His response was brief, and they became, as we all know, very brief as time went on. But his response prominently included the phrase, "After the life I have had, I certainly do not have anything to complain about." Not many people would ever say that. Now it is time to hear from Steve himself. As many of us have experienced, Steve was not highly talkative these last few years as he quietly dealt with his private hell. So a few months ago, on one of my visits to him, I said that both of us are getting old. Fate might take us any time. I told him I was writing down some messages to a few loved ones in case I was taken too quickly. I asked him if he would like to do the same, with me as the scribe. He immediately said yes, and with your permission, I will read you some of the thoughts he shared. Although he was extremely concise, it was more complete sentences than I had heard from him in many months, and each statement was crystal clear. I apologize to some of you in advance for not asking about you, but this is what Buck wanted to say. Keith, I respect you so much for your kindness to others. Jeff, you were always an inspiration to me. I really respect how you work and what you do, but also your strong feelings about friendship. Bill, you are an absolutely great friend. I have always learned a lot from you. I hope to see you soon. Yatsik, great to have you at the home. It was great to see you, especially with that hat. You are a special friend. Dick, I appreciate all your help at Balfour's. You are a good brother. I didn't see where he is. 6 out of 9. D, you are an amazing person. I like everything that you do. Please realize that I appreciate it all. 7, Natalia. I love you so much and appreciate everything you did for me. You are fantastic. I love you so much. Alex, you are the best son anyone could ever have. I love having you with me most of the time. And finally, Dorota, I wish you all the best to get back to the sport you love. I hope to see you soon. I really respect you as a mother. I am so happy for my kids to have you as their mother. Love you. Take care and be good to yourself always. So, it's not often you get to hear from the person at their own ceremony. I'm not a religious person, but after the last few years, I think I have become a believer in angels because I have gotten to see 3 of them in day-to-day life. Dee, Natalia, and Alex were simply amazing to watch as their love for Buck was made manifest in a stunning amount of practical and emotional support, often at high personal cost. So Buck, my dear friend, it's time to say goodbye. What a run we had for 52 years. What a glorious roller coaster of a run we had. We shared about everything, whether it was pizza or life dreams or the embarrassing admitting of big mistakes, of which he and I had several. Our lives have been highly intertwined for literally 52 years. They will stay intertwined because we will keep an eye out for your 2 precious munchkins and the 1 precious mother of said munchkins. And I promise to torture poor Alex with my repeated inquiries about his career plans and execution of them. We will shower them with love and support. A meager substitute for you, but the best we can do. And we will always invoke your memories and values as best we can. I will always love you. I will always miss you. I am grateful for what we had. Thank you.
Dear friends, my entire family and I join you in cherishing all the memories you've shared today. For over 30 years, we shared everything life brought us with Stephen and the entire Buckley family. What began as a friendship between Dorota and Mała Dorota, as Steve called my wife for many years, blossomed into a family friendship. I hold many joyful moments in my memory, raising our children together, travels, conversations until sunrise at the Działka in Warsaw, the annual ritual of watching the Super Bowl together, and of course those most important years when the Broncos won. I also hold in my memory those difficult moments, and we could always count on each other. When we were leaving Denver in November, after celebrating Steve's 70th birthday, we all felt that we had once again managed to capture special moments together, more unforgettable ones, the kind that stay in your heart forever. Today, my family and I want to give thanks for Steve, for his presence in our lives, for what was, for what is, and for what will be. Steve, we will win the Super Bowl yet. You will see it. You will see it. I believe in God, who is love. And love has no end. It never dies. Steve knew how to love. I've seen it many times, and I see it today in your faces. Especially when I look at Natalia and Alex. When I recall those moments from recent years when they were with Dad. That love is with us, and it will be forever. I would like to ask you now to stand and observe a moment of silence in memory of Stephen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God, who art love, only you allow us, like Lazarus, to rise from the tomb of our sins. I ask you to unfold our brother Stephen and his family with your infinite love and unfathomable mercy. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace. Amen. W imię Ojca i Syna i Ducha Świętego. Amen. Thank you.
A few days before the memorial in Warsaw, we were going through some of our dad's things. We came across a small wooden box. It was his memory box. In it, he kept old photos, letters, IDs, and objects. Some were clear in their importance, others had meaning only he would have known. In that box, we found these pages. The title at the top, in his handwriting, reads Reflections on Death. As we read through, we realized he wrote this as he was coming to terms with his mother's death in 1998. Throughout his sickness, we often remarked how resilient he was. He didn't dwell on what he was losing. He always openly and gratefully accepted help. Reading his reflections, it's clear his acceptance of death as a part of life came a long time ago. We wanted to read 2 short pages from what he wrote and finish today's memorial in his own words. It is important to give care and to participate in the parting process for both the receiver and the giver of care. Probably there is a more obvious benefit to the giver of care, especially in terminal illness.
There is a process of dying. There needs to be a progression and acceptance, even a relief at the move from life as part of life.
There is life even in disease, even in illness. It is a struggle, and that is the essence of life. Death is stillness, the absence of struggle. The difference between a deathly ill person and a dead person is vast. As good as dead is terribly wrong in perception.
Life is a journey. Dying is part of that journey. Perhaps that is why the dying process is so very important. How long, where, with whom, how aware, embracing and participating in that process is a major part of life. Birth, growing, procreating, aging, and dying, cycles of a whole natural process. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. And before we go outside and have some drinks before dinner, we wanted to take a moment to listen to one of his favorite songs together, Sunshine on My Shoulders by John Denver.
Sunshine on my shoulders makes me happy. Sunshine in my eyes can make me cry. Sunshine on the water looks so lovely. Sunshine almost always makes me high. If I had a day that I could give you, I'd give to you a day just like today. If I had a song that I could sing for you, I'd sing a song to make you feel this way. Sunshine on my shoulders makes me happy. Sunshine in my eyes can make me cry. Sunshine on the water looks so lovely. Sunshine almost always makes me high. If I had a tale that I could tell you, I'd tell a tale sure to make you smile. wish that I could wish for you. I'd make a wish for sunshine all the while. Sunshine on my shoulders makes me happy. Sunshine in my eyes can make me cry. Sunshine on the water looks so lovely. Sunshine almost always makes me high. Sunshine almost all the time.